Hello everyone, my name is Kimberly. Hopefully you guys have watched my other two videos. I'm going to be talking about how we could allocate and redistribute funding to police departments. So when we're looking at police departments, I'm going to reiterate some things. We have specialized units in police departments. We have hostage negotiation teams. We have VICE. VICE is there for various reasons, not just drug related, but human trafficking and pedophilia, and try to find, things like that, and crimes that are being committed by that. And then you have the detectives of sex crimes and homicide. And then you have your narcotics officers, and then you have your SWAT team. And I'm sure there could be other special, you have your canines as well. I can't forget about them. So if your canines, your canine units, and your handlers as well. So when we're looking at this defunding police departments, you're not only hurting the frontline worker, like the beat cops, the ones that you're seeing committing the use of force, like they're committing use of force, or they're using use of force extremely higher than normal. Right now we're in a climate situation regarding protesters. So when you are protesting, everyone has their First Amendment right. You need to exercise your First Amendment right. And so protesting is extremely powerful, and it can say a lot. We've had women's marches, we have science marches, climate change marches, and now we're having protests for injustice, because there is a lot of injustice that is happening, not just within the police departments, but also within the justice system itself. So looking at everything that is, transpired and come out within the past couple weeks, it's been eye-opening. It's very awesome to see all of these protesters, millions and millions of people coming together. You're in large cities, and then you have thousands of people in small towns, or hundreds of people in small towns. And some of the people who are in charge of, making these marches and these protesting, they're leading these protests, they're children. One I saw was 14 years old, and I thought that was amazing. And you have a lot of different people, and the beautiful thing is, if you look at all the protesters, they're from different backgrounds, they're different races, they're probably different, the cultures are different, socioeconomic statuses are different, religions, everything, name it. You're seeing people come together in unity, and that's when you're seeing these really big changes happening. However, regarding that, going back to my last video about mental health officers, I believe that whole idea needs to be not dismantled, but looking at how they approach mental health. As a mental health officer, they need to work in more of mental health officers. So like each shift, so I live in a town that is approximately 130,000 people, and at any given time there are only 12 officers on the roads. There are only 12 patrols on the road. So when a crime happens in my city, most of those officers respond to that call. So we have a high population and a very low ratio of police officers. And we have a lot of crime in this little city that I live in, and we're seeing cases that are happening, like murder cases and robberies, theft, things like that. Those cases don't even get a chance to see the light of day because they're constantly being bombarded and overwhelmed. Well, how about we hire more people? And I understand that officers already have a hard enough time. In the state of Texas, you have to take the T-Cole, and you have to make sure that that's updated. Then some departments, you have to have a 4-year degree, a 2-year degree, or have served in the military for 3 years or more. And then you're going to be evaluated and reevaluated on your physical fitness along with your mental fitness in the beginning. However, after a couple of years, you're a completely different person after being exposed to the public in the manner that, things happen. So, like police officers, if you look at the calls that they get, if they're not like Amy Cooper calls, or the Karen calls, but they're actual calls, they're in a constant state of like a mode of de-escalating crisis. So when they finally get a chance to just like take a deep breath and go home, there are high DV rates. And then there are a lot of police officers, they're one of the highest professions behind the military that have suicide rate. Like their suicide rate is astronomically high for a profession, and for active profession. And there's a lot of stigma around the mental health aspect. So I talked about having more mental health officers. I believe that that is instrumental for any police department. Not only having mental health officers, they need to be specific, like it needs to be its own specialized unit within a police department. Because I mean, we have, the hostage negotiation teams, and those people, the negotiators have good in-depth idea how to de-escalate a situation when people are being held against their will in a hostage situation. So you have that part, and then you have detectives who are investigating sex crimes and homicides, and there's a lot of mental resiliency that has to come within that part. So I'm going to reiterate something that I said before. Just because you wear a badge doesn't mean you have to be this mentally resilient, strong person. You absolutely need to be resilient, yes. However, mentally strong, that's it. You're human, so there's going to be a time where you're completely perfect, and then all of a sudden everything hits you at once, and you're like, crap. And you can have a video like that lady did in my last video that I did, where she was having a breakdown over a McMuffin, and that's a cry for help. And I hope that she got the help and people realized that, wow, there was something else. So people look at just the main people that they see, and then they're like, oh well, imagine solving crimes, you're raped or you're sexually assaulted, and then the detectives and people are human, okay? So you're having detectives and first responders who are responding in the best way that they know how, and in the best way that they know how might not be in a compassionate, like a mental health compassionate area. So that's where I believe, these mental health officers need to have their own specialized unit so they can have proper training, not only about mental health, but also substance use. So I know I approached a sheriff's department here where I live about Narcan and Narcan training and administering Narcan. And the sheriff was like, absolutely not. We're not going to have Narcan. Like, I don't believe in that. Like, and his whole ideology behind it was disgusting, to be quite honest. Like, we have to, absolutely have to take into account substance use is just as important as mental health, because people are using substances for a variety of reasons, and many of them are due to undiagnosed mental illness or trying to cope with said mental illness. So that's why having a whole mental health unit of officers to understand, okay, well, this is a substance use issue. Okay, I'm going to administer Narcan. Yes, it's okay to do that. I know how to do that. And then talk to them like a person instead of, seeing them as a threat because the way that they're acting. I know I've administered Narcan to an individual on the side of the road, and I call it like a switch. Like, immediately, they can go from literally dead to combative, and then you have to figure out how to assess that situation in the best way you know how. And that's where we're seeing a lot of issues arise. So if you have officers who are taking someone who, used Narcan, or they administer Narcan on an individual, when they looked through their stuff after the individual came up and, the paramedics were already there, they, check the pockets, and they do a pat down, and they do everything, and they get all of their items, and then they have drugs on them. Okay, well, they're going to stack on a charge for possession, and it could be simple possession, or it could be felony possession. So in the state of Texas, if you have a vape pen that has not vape juice, but like THC, that is an automatic felony, and it's a felony possession of a controlled substance. And rather looking at, oh, well, they're just an addict and they need to, okay, well, Austin also has a very awesome thing called the Sobriety Center. So it's a center where they take people who are absolutely intoxicated, but they're safe enough where they're not dying, and they need to go to the hospital to get their stomach pumped, but they can go to the sobering center and sober up, and they don't get any charges. The person gets to leave once they're okay. There's a nurse on hand. I mean, it is an amazing concept to how we approach simple things. Like, yeah, you're going to be drunk in public in Austin because they're 6th Street. Like, that's what's going to happen. But how you're acting on 6th Street and how you're interacting with people, that is a whole other, approach. So if you're not a violent person, or you're being violent and belligerent because you're completely wasted and you just don't even know what's happening, if they haven't actually like assaulted someone and that person doesn't want to press charges, they should go to the sobering center. But if they're a reoccurring person at the sobering center, then perhaps we need to look at more treatment centers. So that is another area where, a mental health professional or a mental health officer can look and, oh, well, okay, this person, I've had, multiple encounters with this person, and they've been on, either whatever drugs, a substance, or they're completely always drunk and belligerent. Well, maybe, we can throw some money into a treatment facility instead of, making it a crime to have, a substance use problem. Because, like I stated, there's a variety of reasons why people use substances, and they're coping with something, or they're just coping with the day because it's been a hard day because they're homeless and they have nothing, they're trying to just like survive that day. Because another thing here, being homeless is a crime. Like they can do a vagrancy crime, like it's a lot, and homeless people being homeless shouldn't be a crime. Absolutely, you're going to see them taking a shit somewhere, excuse my language, but you're going to see them using the bathroom outside, because where else can they go? A lot of places don't allow someone to just use the bathroom because they know that there's a high population of homeless individuals, and that's where, Austin has some amazing housing programs, but they're the supply and demand. So the demand for housing is so high and the wait list is so high because properties are like, well, no, we can't take someone who has had a felony in the past 10 years. Well, you can have this stand-up person who is just homeless due to the circumstance, whatever circumstance it is, but they can't get housing because they have this felony. It's not a violent felony, but they have this felony from like 7 years ago and they haven't committed a crime since. Well, they're going to be denied. And that's like when I worked in the housing or housing veterans experiencing homelessness, that was something that I noticed, like that was starting to become a thing, where landlords and property management was like, no, we're not going to take anybody who has a violent crime or a felony, or whatever. And so it just adds to the further stigma, or it doesn't give someone a good feeling about what's going forward. Like, they know they did that crime, they did their time, and now they're being further, prosecuted in the public eye because of their background. Well, how are they supposed to thrive and become a better version of themselves if they're constantly reminded about that thing that they did 7 years ago or 3 years ago or whatever, and they're trying to better themselves? That's, there's a lot that goes into that. So reallocating and redistributing funds to having hostage negotiators send them to school to earn a bachelor's degree if they don't already have one in psychology, or have someone like me, a forensic psychologist, be like, okay, well, okay, this situation happened, there's a hostage negotiator, blah, blah, blah. And then after we start looking at the individual, doing a background on them, and then seeing what has happened through either social media or public records, we can see, oh, well, they took a hostage or they tried to do this because they lost their loved one, or they're getting a divorce, or they completely had a psychotic break because of a multitude of things, a death or whatever. And then that's something that needs to be looked at a psychological level. So that's where we would come in as a forensic psychologist, come in after the person is apprehended, and after the interview's already been done, then we can assess and evaluate the situation on a psychological level. Anyways, so I believe that having beat cops, that's what we're seeing on the front line besides SWAT, or, they're in riot gear, they're doing X, Y, and Z. Most people don't want to interact with the police. They want to be able to peacefully protest without provocation from the police or an outside entity. So looking back at some of the places and businesses that were broken into, there was an article that came out, and I will add it in the comments, but people broke into a pharmacy, and I was like, oh, well, it's a pharmacy. That doesn't surprise me, but they broke into the pharmacy, and the number two highest things that were stolen and completely, like, they lost all of their inventory, was Suboxone and insulin. So that tells you something right there. So insulin, obviously, like, that's pretty expensive, and if you're out of work and you no longer have insurance because it was employer paid insurance, then you probably don't have access to proper health care, and you probably don't have access to said insulin that you need or a loved one needs. So of course people are going to take advantage of that situation, and oh, well, this sucks. It sucks, but a lot of corporations are coming out, and a lot of businesses are coming out, and like, we can replace our things, we can't replace lives. And it's not giving people an excuse to go out and wreck some stuff, but it gives you a lot of perspective on why people are doing X, Y, and Z. We're about to see an avalanche of evictions because COVID-19, and nobody's had a job, or people haven't had a job. We have 50 million people out of jobs. And so this situation, it was just the perfect storm. It wasn't a coincidence. Like, there's a conspiracy going around, like, oh, well, he died because, and then it just a flood of things. It wasn't that. It was all circumstance. Like, it's all of a circumstance. But you can have a completely peaceful protest with hundreds of thousands of people, 0 people get arrested, or you have the provocators. So you have people who are trying to provoke the protesters into doing something. So when I was in Iraq as a gunner, we were on a road, and it was, I don't even know what the people were doing, but they were really happy, they were excited, they were shooting off their guns, because that's what people in the Middle East do, they just shoot their guns off. And I remember one of my trainings was, it only takes one unhappy person to turn a happy crowd negative, like unhappy. So that's what we're seeing. It's in a situation, it's environmental. So if you have someone who, provokes the police, and then it immediately gets a response by the police, then there's going to be some issues that are going to happen. We're going to see more resistance, or we're going to see people provoking the police to further their agenda that the police are bad. Well, don't provoke the police, and police don't provoke protesters. It seems really simple, but it's not, because you're not on the ground, you're not dealing with it. And again, it only takes one person to throw something and break a window, and other people are like, hell yeah, excuse my language, but they're like, yeah, and then they all go off, and then it just turns into a riot, when it's really not. Like, people who are wanting to peacefully protest and get what is happening out in a way that they know how, meaning marching and having signs and being peaceful, they're not going to ruin their communities. Like, you're seeing a lot of people coming from different places, especially right after the officers were not even, held accountable for what they did to George Floyd. You saw people coming from out of state, and then all the people who were about 98% of people who were arrested due to rioting or police, whatever they were doing with the police, they were not from the town. So you're seeing people from out of state or out of town trying to disrupt and have destruction on a city or an area. People who live in that area will not let that happen, and if they do, that says a lot about how they just feel about everything overall. So the approach to having more mental health officers and having a proper mental health officer unit, I believe it should be a specialized unit that people are in, would say a lot, and it would help a lot. So my next video will be about oh goodness, there's so many things that I could talk about, but my next video will talk about how we can look at things after, say we implemented a specialized mental health officer unit, like completely like that. Let's talk about the training that they're getting with their training officers, and how, negative training can impact the department. So I will touch more on that after or in my next video. So I'll see you.